Hi there, welcome to another Lit Lunch Online. I'm Lucy Popescu and I'm delighted to be talking to Caoilinn Hughes about her second novel, The Wild Laughter. Welcome, Caoilinn.
Hello, Lucy.
Hughes' debut novel, Orchid and the Wasp, was longlisted for the Authors Club Best First Novel Award and won the Collyer Bristow Prize. Her poetry collection, Gathering Evidence, won the Shine Strong Award and was shortlisted for 4 other prizes. Her work has appeared in Granta, Chin House, Best British Poetry, BBC Radio 3 and elsewhere. The Wild Laughter begins in 2008 and the Celtic tiger has left devastation in its wake. Set on a farm in Roscommon, brothers Hart and Cormac Black are dealing with a recession that has ruined their hardworking father's livelihood. As he sickens and the debts pile up, they face a devastating choice that threatens to tear the family apart and everything they hold dear. Caoilinn, could we start with a short reading, please, to give us a flavour of the book?
Sure thing. Thank you so much. Thanks so much to the Authors Club for having me on. I am going to read a section from page 21, so it's not too spoiler heavy, hopefully, and it's a little bit early. The character is a little bit younger than he is for the rest of the book, so imagine that I am I guess 18, 20 or 18-ish year old Roscommon man. And there's a little bit of Irish at the start. Agus sé sin on 5, and that means, and that's the problem. You can't downsize a potato field. Agus sé sin on 5. The chief called from his tractor the following night when I went out with a sandwich. The chief's parents, who, as I said, were burnt to slags in a hay barn when he was a youth, were Gaeilgeoirs. He kept on the bit of Irish to honour them. I made my way along the mud bank toward him. I wanted him inside in the sitting room with the paper flopped across his wide lap like a dead stingray, and me sprawled sleepily on the couch, pretending to read Philadelphia, Here I Come. I wanted to get straight to the point with the chief, like a garrulous private, and make frantic recommendations to do with the properties. Wasn't there some poor illiterate creature who doesn't get out much or who doesn't have the internet, who by some miracle doesn't know the home soil has gone to slurry, who'd happily lap up a villa in Malaga with shared swimming pools and a dishwasher and a motorised awning and oversized tiles? Alternatively, wasn't there investing to be done now that we were all in the pits and could only crawl upwards? Wasn't it time to let go of this outmoded life? If we could sell something, I'd live without a kidney, had my looks, or arrange a county-wide poker championship for Cormac to work the odds of with a Brobdingnagian brain on him for us to win ourselves back, slowly but surely. What I ended up saying, holding out the sandwich, was, "There's lamb in that." He laboured out of the tractor. It was dragging a disc-type hiller behind her. The pattern of it carried on, the angled discs scooping in soil like a child's hands gathering sand to make a castle. The vines bowing down to let the tractor pass over them and then springing up behind, seeming renewed, devoted. Doing lines? We both squinted back down the length of the road that had been turned a deeper shade of earth, illumined by a flash of moonlight leading straight back to our house an acre off. "A manner of lines," he said. "I'll be doing it by hand before long, spraying pesticide one squirt at a time." He took the sandwich from me, out of a Mr. Muscle bottle. He winked and put the quarter of the sandwich in his mouth at once. Opportunities come in all ways and sizes, this time in the form of a stuffed gob. No, it was too soon. But then my mind was so filled with the large things I wanted to say, I was stuck for small ones. The chief chewed away and swallowed dryly, never one to force talk. He was happy enough in his calm refueling. "We're back to school Tuesday, tomorrow's off," I said. He made a noise of acknowledgement. "Cormac's doing college stuff." He looked at me sideways, then spoke with a full mouth. "Have you enough to be doing?" I cringed suddenly at my school talk so late in the day. I'd scraped together 3 of the Leaving Cert subjects. Managing the others this year was doubtful. "You could help me widen the pond below," the chief said, almost optimistic. "Drain out the wet year that's in it." "Yeah, I'll do that. I want to do something though. I don't know. Some variety of physical mastery would have been the thing to want. But I tried not lie to him. I like making things, woodworking maybe, if I wasn't so tired from... I looked from field to sky to lay the blame elsewhere for my wreckery. Huge iron clouds blockaded the moon. Gandhi wouldn't have had the fortitude for stargazing in these parts. I heard the promising outbreath of a laugh. Home brewing is inevitable, one of these days, I said. But maybe I should take that fiddle down from the attic, learn to play a woeful recession tune. He grimaced. Woeful 'twould be. Don't be demanding fiddle lessons is all I'll say. I saw his hand go to his pocket in the gloom. Always on about the travel. You might take a look at your own country before scarping off to Germany or Cambodia, wherever it is you're thinking. Walking's as good a pastime as any, to know yourself. There's history in these flatlands to fill a sizable mind, no elbowing tourists along the stone wall. I looked at him to get across my expression. Oh, I do forget about the dogs. Then he took in the last of the sandwich. He didn't press me on it. Then I gauged him loosened enough, so I took a deep breath and spoke quickly. We could declare bankruptcy. It was Cormac came up with it, so it'd be well thought out. The thing is, neither of us wants the farm, Dad. It's a good life, but Cormac's too arrogant for it. He said he will in his shite work for government subsidies. And you can go anywhere with a face like mine. I might meet a girl who won't want this. I'm thinking Australia sounds the job. And the thing is, if you go bankrupt, you could retire then. That was the point of the houses and the whole mess anyways. He had the mouthful long swallowed and was looking into the restless landscape, sporadically moon-lamped, as if the night was giving sign to a dangerous reef up ahead. He was 6'2" and had another year of standing to his full height, then a 5-year crash and collapse. I felt a gossoon stood beside him. You lads and your grand plans, he said, not to me, but to the hours of work ahead. I was glad not to have his gaze on me then. There was no way of knowing how wrong I'd been, but I was relieved not to have the idea strangled in my skull any longer. You can tell your brother, your ideas are for lining the pockets of men like Morrigan and making them more self-righteous while you're at it. The two brothers had slaughtered, symbolically slaughtered and literally some lambs. I tried to understand him, but it was a tone I hadn't heard. I guessed right that he wasn't talking bankruptcy. It was to get back at him, I said. The chief lifted his stubbled jowl, the cap shadowing his face. On the insurance, them lambs went, and Morrigan unable to sell them for the price he was asking, the fierce market that's in it. He was waiting till the last minute to get rid of them. He telephoned Jerry this morning, boastful of the Easter godsend. The chief would never have spoken so freely with Cormac. It was as if the night air and the waxy ears of his harmless youngest son were the particular conditions for talking. But I'd have gone ignorant just then. Like a gomy, I said, I'll do an hour for you now. I'm used to doing lines. He didn't smile, but threw the thermos into the tractor and hauled the new weight of himself up onto the seat. What ye lads don't understand. He stopped himself. But sure, why would ye? Who'd have taught you? The engine coughed up and off he moved in his tired machinery, making lines as straight as humanly possible into the unknowable night.
Great, thank you. That gives a really good flavour of the book. I mean, it's a wonderful, poignant, but it's an unflinching portrait of a family unravelling. The brothers, their rough love for one another, their fierce sibling rivalries are a terrific creation. They reminded me of the two siblings in Orchid and the Wasp. In many respects, they are just poles apart. What or who inspired them?
I think if I'm feeling around for the feeling that I had at the start of writing a book, I often don't know very much. And the feeling that I had was of cowardice and bravery. And I actually, the first characters I had were Hart and his mother, Nora. And Nora there was a kind of an image of Nora looking through the bedroom keyhole to see if her adult son still living at home was alive, and neither of them were talking to one another because they were unable to talk about something quite enormous. And that was the image that I kind of started with. So even though the novel then pulled the kind of dynamic, the central dynamic between Hart and his brother Cormac, it didn't start out that way. And I guess I'm from a family of 5 children, so and I feel like sibling relationships can be so fascinating because they become increasingly complex as you get older, but they don't evolve often in the way that your relationships with other people in your life, you know, friends and colleagues and so on, evolve. They often just are stymied or stuck. And so there's a kind of tension that can keep building. So I tend to find sibling dynamics really interesting. Yeah.
But masculinity and survival in a macho world are prominent themes in your work. Why did you want to write from the perspective of male characters? And I include the boy's father here, the chief. And how did you get under their skin?
Yes, to use the word culture, maybe about macho culture, is to denigrate the word culture, but I do think, you know, we all exist within a macho culture. You know, the systems that we live within are still patriarchal, and they haven't really been dismantled. They might have been modified, you know, to varying degrees depending on where you live, but they still, to me, they're still defined by, you know, bravado and risk, and confidence being met with reward, and a kind of disciplinarian self-approach that's encouraged to take place if one doesn't succeed within it. So I suppose with Orchid and the Wasp, the protagonist was trying on this macho persona, and kind of becoming quite disillusioned at the extent to which she could succeed if she managed to play it well. Whereas in this novel, I think it's a very different type of character who doesn't have the same self-awareness and kind of irony that Gail had. And he is kind of desperately trying to, you know, resist stereotype while he might be falling into one.
And why are you interested in what pulls a family apart rather than what holds them together?
That's a very interesting question. I suppose the forces that are pulling them apart, both in Orchid and the Wasp and in The Wild Laughter, are external to my mind. You know, the tensions are there, either to be, you know, at the beginning and at the end, to maybe different degrees, but they're always there consistently throughout. But the forces that are kind of trying to break them are seem to me to be coming from the outside, from circumstance, from social and economic and political circumstance. Yeah, does that ring true to you?
Yeah. I mean, you interweave the personal and the political to great effect. In both your novels, the 2008 recession and the catastrophic effect it had in Ireland loom large. Why do you keep coming back to this?
Yeah, this is a, you know, potato farm novel, whereas, you know, Orchid and the Wasp was a very urban novel, and it's inherently auspicious, you know, to set an Irish novel on the potato farm. And it's interesting because I hadn't thought about this when I was writing it, but when I was thinking about what might come up in interviews, like I went back to the editorial that was published in The Economist in 1847 in response to the Irish famine. And it was really fascinating to see that the messaging coming through then from a paternalistic, you know, colonizing dynamic, it could almost be reprinted, you know, could have been in 2009, 2010. I might go off on a tangent if I start down this line. There is an argument as to why the crisis in Ireland was so intense and so enormous, and it did, it was quantitatively larger. It was the biggest bailout in human history, and it threatened the whole kind of EEC, and so there was, it was kind of extra, let's say, to the general kind of financial crisis of 2008. But at the same time, the reasons for it, I think, are also existent in in the UK and in the US. Banking and financial deregulation was a big part of it. A lot of the kind of markers of neoliberalism. And the messaging, in The Economist at the time was this, that the innocent suffer with the guilty is a melancholy truth, and it's an aspect of civilization and society that's always existed and will always exist. And every breach in the laws of a morality or social order brings its own punishment and inconvenience. And so this wasn't the idea that people were culpable for the crash, and that people should internalize austerity in the sense that this is a self-disciplining thing. It's a rectifying, morally redeeming moment for a country to go through. And so it was very painful in Ireland because independence only happened in the 1920s. 1922 kind of finally, and then there was a brief period of kind of well-being in the Second World War when food prices were so high in Ireland because they were neutral during the war. And so there was a brief period of well-being, and then the grimmest decades imaginable, the 50s, 60s, 70s, into the 80s. And it wasn't until the 90s and noughties that Ireland experienced this massive boom, the fastest growth ever seen in a country over such a short period of time. And so when there was the crash, there hadn't really been a long enough period of self-governance and of security, I think, for the country to feel that is secure in its own self-sufficiency, to feel post-Catholic, and so all of those tensions and anxieties of a colonized, ex-colonized nation, and repressed by the church, were ready among the people to kind of self-blame, as opposed to being critical of the larger system. And so it's still kind of there, there's still, so I hope that although it's set in the kind of Irish crisis, that those problems are accessible and interesting to people outside of Ireland. I can only hope.
Yes, they are. And another major theme, you explore assisted suicide and its repercussions in rural Ireland with great compassion and dark humour. Why did you want to explore such a thorny issue?
So I never know what I'm going to be writing about at the beginning of a novel. I'm writing into the dark, in the kind of Zadie Smith school of writing, rather than kind of having a rough plan and doing, rough redrafts. I tend to just do one brick at a time, and by the time I'm at the end of the novel, I'm pretty much done. I just have editing after that, and the editing might still be substantial. It might still go on for a few years, but I won't be changing characters or adding subplots or anything kind of major. But so really from the first line, I don't even have the second page. I go really into the dark. So I had no idea what would come up in the book. And when there was this issue of assisted suicide coming up in the book, that was a surprise to me. And it makes sense because I'm very interested in it, and have strong feelings. But I did have to go and do some research for that, and I tend to try and avoid research because I procrastinate a lot. So as soon as I give myself the excuse of doing research, it's a disaster. But I did have to go and kind of sit in the High Court and speak with judges and various things for that. And I guess again, this is not intentional, but I suppose the subconscious does its work. The assisted suicide kind of works as a type of metaphor as well, and it does kind of tie in very closely with the kind of national pathology of self-reproach. during that period. And because the whole novel is exploring kind of cowardice and bravery, it's an awkward marrying, because I don't want to really suggest that those themes are on the assisted suicide narrative of the book. I see that as more being kind of a plot point rather than, you know, what the novel's about per se, you know.
And how difficult was it to interweave humour into your novel, in particular to make light of difficult subjects and not turn off your reader?
Yeah, as to whether or not I'll turn off readers again, I have no idea, and I also am really curious to see how it goes by country, because, you know, there was a gorgeous TLS review in the UK, and it was such a relief to me, because I didn't know how far the book could travel, in the sense of, you know, also in the sense of its humour. But this kind of black humor that's very much in the vein of, you know, well, it comes out of a tradition, you know, Flann O'Brien and Beckett, and there's all this kind of, you know, setup that you can't help as an Irish person, you know, being kind of informed by. There's, I don't know, I haven't read any studies on this, so it feels very anecdotal, maybe self-congratulatory, but we like Irish people kind of often talk about the kind of black humor and the desire to laugh at really dark things, and maybe that there is truth in that and maybe it's also a post-colonial, you know, coping mechanism for, you know, finding a way to kind of laugh at oppressions, and, you know, I'm not sure, but then I also you try and write what you like to read. And I love funny books, you know, not necessarily comedies, but just books that, I don't know, do you know the film critic Mark Kermode?
Yeah.
He has this 6 laugh test, you know, for films. And I kind of feel like I have something similar with novels, that, you know, I like to, over the course of 300 pages or so, laugh about 6 times.
Well, it definitely works. I just think it's very courageous what you do, and you did it in both books. And you were talking about step by step. So I really felt your story at the end could have gone either way. I mean, that's why it just kept us gripped until the end, because it just could go either way. Had you planned the ending in advance, or did your story evolve as you were writing it, as you were suggesting earlier?
Yes, it did evolve as I was writing it. That said, the opening passage was very much, it was almost as I wrote it. I mean, I changed some lines, and there were some lines where the register, I had that wrong, or I had the voice slightly off, and I was able to revise. But a lot of those sentences in that opening section, which are very kind of foreshadowing, were there from the start. And actually, if you look at them, they do kind of tell you a lot about the book. But there's something else that happens apart from the obvious thing. In the last kind of 3 pages, there's something else that happens that I did not know would happen. And I can't really talk about it without spoiling it. But
I think I know what you mean. Yeah.
So I really was like shocked, you know. I'm a very bad judge of character in person. I'm hopeless. The only thing that I do with that is I know that I'm hopeless. I know that if I formed an impression of someone, I'm likely to be wrong. So I try to ignore it, or to, you know, push it aside. And as a writer, that's actually really useful, because, you know, it does mean that there's room for kind of maneuverability when when there's somebody there that, like, say someone like Cormac, who Hart would have completely written off, or his mother, or, you know, but it did mean for me that with this novel I was devastated. Because I didn't really know. I mean, I knew plot-wise, I knew what he would say, but I didn't know.
It was very poignant. I must admit, I was weeping. Yeah, but quite a few pages before the end. So what is your writing process and routine?
This is not to be facetious, but it really is true that I have to reach peak self-loathing. I just, whenever I finish something, I try and allow for a gestation period before starting a new book or a new story. Because I do think that that's just how I've worked in the past. I've needed time, and I have to trust that, because if I push too quickly, I'll write something synthetic or something that's actually a weird limb of the last book. So I try and allow for that. But at the same time, I never start when I should start. I'll procrastinate. And often I have a title, and a title will be kind of like a magnet. And then as soon as I have that, I'll really want to, I'll know that that's a thing I'm going to write, but a lot of time can still pass until I really hate myself and have to kind of set timers or something to actually. It's an addiction to the internet as well, of course, the inability to just sit down with. So and I finally get to that point, and then once I've got a page or two, then I'm in.
But do you have an optimum time of day when you write?
I'm just cranky in the mornings and that lasts until about lunchtime. And so I am better. I mean, I'll work a normal day. If when I'm not teaching, I kind of go from, I'm in between jobs at the moment. In fact, I just did an interview the other day, and I can only say, if you know any young people doing their first interviews now, give them a hug. Well, give them a socially distanced high five, because it is not easy having 6 faces on Zoom. And I can't imagine if it's someone's first interview. But anyway, so at the moment I'm kind of writing. Well, at the moment I'm doing promotional things. I'm writing an essay, and I'm not a natural nonfiction writer, so that takes me a really long time. But I am better if I'm allowed to. I have a partner who works very well 9 to 5, unfortunately, and I don't. I work really well between 8 and midnight, but I'm often I get sucked into the watching a movie or reading a book and end up not writing. So the self-loathing.
And who have been your biggest literary influences?
This is so tough, because so I grew up reading poetry and plays, and that's not for as hoity-toity a reason as it might sound. I found novels very intimidating, and I was a slow reader, slow learner, and I felt that novels were full of these things that you had to remember. They were long, and I felt that there was just this obligation that you should be able to read novels, and and if your siblings have read them, they used to get passed around, and I would just pretend I'd learn off the thing on the back. And I just felt they weren't for me. And there were a lot of poetry books and plays in the house, and I felt they were, much more accessible. There was a lot of blank space, and they felt very intimate, and it felt like a direct conversation between the person who picks it up and the author or the characters. So that was my entry point into reading. And I didn't really read novels properly until I was, 18, 19. So I didn't start writing novels until I was in my late 20s. I wrote poetry to begin with, and I had a big box of banned books, a Penguin book, which I actually just looked at recently to see what was in it, because I had felt that Edna O'Brien and Toni Morrison were in it, but actually it was all men. It was A Clockwork Orange, The Master and Margarita, A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, Lolita. What else did it have? Well, it was a brilliant collection of books, because it happened to have a lot of books that were very satisfying sentence by sentence, so rewarded a slow reader. So I would have been very much, I'm informed by that. And Irish theatre, everyone from Sean O'Casey to Beckett and Singh and Marina Carr, and then the poets, everyone, from Yeats, who I loathed, to Sinead Morrissey, and a lot of contemporary poetry as well. So all over the shop. My influences are all over the shop.
And who have you been reading now to offer comfort during these difficult times?
So I was a judge of a new literary prize called the Dalkey Awards, the Dalkey Literary Awards, part of a festival in Dublin. And so I was doing the Emerging Writer Prize, and so we had a shortlist to read. So that really, it was awarded to Sinead Gleeson for her essay collection Constellations, which is beautiful. But that took up a lot of my reading time during lockdown. And actually at the moment I'm reading the Notebook, and this collection of 3 novels by Agatha Christoph. And I had read the Notebook, I don't know if that's showing up very well on the camera, but I had read the Notebook before, and I hadn't read the other 2 novels, which are connected or carry the story on. And there's also a sibling, a kind of an intense sibling dynamic or relationship, and two very different trajectories in this, and it's absolutely amazing. Hungarian.
And I know you're still doing publicity, but have you started work or started thinking about your next novel?
I have been, probably much to my publisher's sadness, I don't know, no, maybe not. I've been writing a lot of short stories. I didn't write short stories until I'd written 3 novels and a few kind of false starts. I didn't do an MFA or anything like that, so I didn't even know about short stories. So once I started, I'm now completely in love with the form, and unfortunately it makes me terrified that I'll never be able to write a novel again, because because it's such a gorgeous form, and every time I have it in my calendar, start new novel, and I have a novel in mind which I've been kind of working on in the background for the last year or so, but the pandemic arrived, and I didn't want to be in any moment, any state of hesitation with committing to a novel, because it takes such an emotional and it takes a certain amount of self-belief and belief in the worthiness of a circumstance and set of characters. And the circumstance part of it is just utterly changed by the pandemic. And so I'm a little worried. At the beginning of the pandemic, I thought, well, I can't write that novel now. I just don't think people are going to want to spend this time in this place, in this context. And now it's kind of calling a little bit again. You can't guess what people need, I suppose, in their reading, or what you need yourself as the writer.
I'm sure Oneworld will be delighted with a collection of your stories. It's a terrific read, The Wild Laughter. It's so good. It must feel so good to get that second novel out of the way and know that it matches the promise of your brilliant debut. So congratulations on both counts. It really is wonderful. And thank you so much for talking to us and for letting us hear a bit more about your writing process and the book. Thank you.
Thank you so much.